In 1266, English law decided that a missing ounce of bread deserved real, physical punishment. Here's the assumption worth killing first. Picture a medieval baker caught shorting a customer. Most people picture a minor scolding, maybe a small fine, the kind of petty penalty any small business might face for a small mistake. Reality actually ran far, far harsher than that simple picture suggests. Cities dragged repeat offenders through the streets on a wooden sledge, the underweight loaf tied around their own neck for the whole town to see and remember for years afterward. Bread wasn't a minor commodity in medieval Europe. It was survival itself, and stealing from a loaf meant stealing from the one thing an entire town couldn't live without. So here's what we're tracing today. The law that tied a loaf's legal weight directly to the price of wheat. The impossible financial squeeze that pushed honest bakers toward cheating almost against their will. The inspectors who pulled loaves off the shelf and weighed them on the spot. The public, physical punishment waiting for anyone caught short. And the strange extra loaf that bakers started giving away for free, purely out of fear. If you assumed bread fraud was a minor offense, stick around, because medieval law treated it as an attack on the entire town's survival. Bread dominated the medieval diet in a way modern eating habits barely resemble. For ordinary people, bread supplied the overwhelming majority of daily calories, sometimes estimated as high as 70 or 80% of what a poor household actually ate in a given week. Cheat a customer on bread, and you weren't skimming profit off a luxury item. You were quietly starving someone, ounce by ounce, meal by meal, a slow harm that added up invisibly across a whole household's week. Medieval authorities understood this real danger clearly enough. It explains why bread fraud carried penalties wildly disproportionate to the small sums of money actually involved in any single loaf. Grain prices swung constantly across a medieval year, shaped by harvest quality, war, weather, and simple bad luck along a trade route. A single bad summer could push wheat prices sharply upward within weeks, squeezing every household's food budget at once, bread included. Authorities watched these swings very closely, always. A hungry town was also, quite often, a dangerous one. Riots, real unrest, broken shop fronts, smashed carts, genuine panic. Real political consequences for whichever lord or council failed to keep the bread supply honest and affordable. Chroniclers across medieval Europe repeatedly recorded bread shortages, triggering genuine civil disorder more reliably than almost any other single grievance a town could name. The pattern repeated itself across centuries and across borders, regardless of who happened to be in charge at the time. An underweight loaf wasn't a mistake. It was theft, 1 ounce at a time, and the law treated it with a seriousness that still surprises people today. Imagine a modern grocery store facing public humiliation in the town square over a mislabeled bag of flour. That exact comparison sounds fairly absurd to modern ears now. In a medieval town, shorting the bread supply came uncomfortably close to that same level of moral outrage. Other everyday foods carried real, genuine regulation too, of course. Meat, ale, cloth, all inspected to some degree by local officials. None of them, though, carried quite the same weight of public anger. Bread touched every single household, rich or poor, every single day. That universality is exactly what made cheating on it feel like a crime against the whole community, not just one unlucky customer. Around 1266, under the reign of Henry IE, English law formalized a remarkably detailed piece of economic regulation known as the Assize of bread and ale, one of the earliest such statutes anywhere in medieval Europe. The Assize set a sliding scale connecting a loaf's required weight directly to the current market price of wheat. When grain prices rose, the legal weight of a penny loaf shrank accordingly. When wheat grew cheap, that same penny had to buy noticeably more bread. Local officials published updated weight tables regularly and prominently, and a baker was expected to know, and strictly follow, the current correct figure at all times. No excuse ever really counted, no matter how genuinely reasonable it sounded at the time. Simply just missing the update, misreading the officially posted weight table, running a busy shop and simply forgetting to check. None of it mattered once an inspector's scale disagreed with what a baker had actually sold that morning. The law cared about the result on the scale, not the reason behind it. The system aimed for genuine fairness on paper, protecting customers from being quietly shortchanged as grain costs shifted week to week. Surviving copies of the Assize spell out the math in remarkable detail. Specific loaf weights tied to specific price bands for a quarter of wheat, the standard measure officials used to track grain markets. A clerk somewhere had clearly done real arithmetic to work out these tables. Raw grain prices converted into finished bread weights, keeping a baker's fair margin intact, at least in theory, no matter which direction the market moved. In practice, it also handed bakers an unforgiving, constantly moving target. They had to hit it exactly, using tools and measurements that were rarely as precise as the law itself demanded. Picture running a business where the correct price of your only product changed regularly, publicly, and without warning. Guessing wrong in either direction could cost you your entire livelihood. Bakers faced a genuine economic trap layered on top of the Assize's already rigid rules, squeezed simultaneously by a fixed legal price they couldn't renegotiate on their own, a wildly fluctuating cost of raw grain they had no meaningful control over, and an unforgiving public willing to report even a small, entirely honest shortfall straight to the nearest inspector. Flour costs fluctuated with harvests, weather, and regional shortages. Prices could swing sharply within one single season. Baking itself caused real, unavoidable weight loss too, water evaporating out of the dough in the heat of the oven. A loaf that weighed correctly going in could easily weigh short coming out, unless a baker compensated in advance, at least according to the law that made no real difference. Plenty of actual shortfalls came from an honest baker misjudging exactly how much moisture a given batch would lose, not from any deliberate intent to cheat a single customer. Skilled, experienced bakers learned to overcompensate deliberately, mixing slightly heavier dough than the final legal weight strictly required at that moment. It built in a safety margin against the oven's own unpredictable moisture loss. Get that margin wrong too many times, in either direction. A baker either lost money on every loaf or risked a public accusation of fraud. Suppose your own product physically shrank a little every single time you finished making it, by an amount that changed with humidity, oven heat, and the exact flour you'd bought that particular week. Enforcement wasn't left purely to chance, luck, or a handful of scattered customer complaints alone. Towns appointed official inspectors, sometimes called searchers, specifically to check bread weights directly and regularly, on a schedule nobody was ever told about in advance. These officials could enter any bakery unannounced, at any hour, and pull loaves at random, off the shelf itself, without hesitation, straight out of a crowded, busy market basket without any warning at all. No advance notice given to the baker whatsoever. They weighed them on the spot against the current legal standard. Some towns required bakers to stamp each loaf with a personal identifying mark, a seal or symbol unique to that baker. A short-weight loaf discovered later in the market could then be traced directly back to whoever had actually baked it. That traceability alone mattered enormously. A baker couldn't simply deny responsibility once his own personal mark turned up on the evidence sitting right there on an inspector's scale. Some towns went further still, requiring bakers to sell only from a fixed, licensed stall rather than wandering the streets hawking bread door to door. It made it that much easier for an inspector to know exactly where to look on any given market day. Fines collected from convicted bakers often flowed into specific civic funds too, sometimes earmarked directly for poor relief. An almost poetic arrangement where cheating on bread ended up helping feed the very people most vulnerable to going hungry in the first place. Whether that arrangement felt like justice to the baker actually paying the fine is, understandably, a separate question historians can't fully answer from the surviving records alone, this many centuries after the fact. Bread's central, unavoidable role also meant the trade attracted real scrutiny at every single level of local government, not just from one lone searcher walking the market alone. Town councils, guild wardens, and sometimes even the Crown's own officials all took a direct interest in whether a given town's bread supply stayed honest and consistently fair. Oversight layered on oversight, in a way few other everyday trades ever experienced. A baker with a bad reputation quickly became a baker nobody in town wanted to buy from at all, regardless of what the letter of the law actually required of him. Reputation traveled fast in a town small enough that everyone genuinely knew everyone else's business, good and bad, right down to the very smallest detail. A single public accusation, even one that never actually reached a formal court hearing, could quietly ruin years of trust. Regular customers usually had other bakers to choose from nearby. Picture every loaf you sold carrying your own personal signature, permanently. Any future accusation of cheating could be traced straight back to your own oven, with no room left for denial. Some historians compare the system to a very early form of brand accountability. The baker's mark functioned much like a modern manufacturer's stamp on a mass-produced product. Get caught cheating once, under your own name, and that mark stopped being a mark of pride. It became evidence instead, waiting to be used against you at the next inspection. A handful of bakers reportedly tried altering or obscuring their marks to dodge exactly this kind of traceability, a workaround that itself became a separate, additional offense once discovered. Tampering with your own identifying seal signaled premeditation in a way an honest miscalculation never could. Courts treated it accordingly, with noticeably less patience than a first-time weight violation ever received. Punishment for confirmed bread fraud escalated well beyond a simple fine, especially for repeat offenders. London's records describe a specific, humiliating penalty. A convicted baker could be dragged through the streets on a hurdle, a kind of wooden sledge normally used to haul goods. The offending underweight loaf hung tied visibly around his own neck the entire way. Crowds gathered specifically to watch, jeer, and remember exactly which baker had been caught cheating them. That hurdle itself carried its own grim symbolism. Normally used to drag a condemned prisoner to execution, the same device repurposed for a baker's public shaming borrowed real weight from that darker association, without ever going quite that far. Nobody, as far as surviving records show, actually died directly over an underweight loaf. Everybody, though, understood exactly what kind of company the punishment was deliberately echoing. Court rolls from several English towns record the exact same offender's name appearing again and again across the years, sometimes spanning a full decade of repeated appearances before the same local court. Neighbors watching that pattern unfold across the years likely drew their own quiet conclusions, long before any official court verdict ever formally confirmed them for the record. A baker cycling repeatedly through fines, warnings, and eventually the hurdle itself, apparently unable or unwilling to keep his loaves consistently honest. Plain, ordinary stubbornness, perhaps. Genuine, ordinary bad luck with a set of unreliable ovens. Or quiet, deliberate, repeated fraud. Impossible to say for certain, this many centuries later. A first offense often brought only a simple warning or a fairly small, manageable fine. The system gave genuine benefit of the doubt to a baker who might simply have miscalculated once, honestly, without any intent to shortchange a single customer walking through his door. Repeat offenders faced steadily escalating consequences too. Additional, noticeably steeper fines each time it happened again. Time in the pillory, exposed to public ridicule. In the most severe documented cases, outright loss of a baker's license to operate an oven at all. A genuine professional death sentence in a trade with few easy alternatives available. Consider, for a moment, the sheer deliberate public theatre of it all. Your own neighbours lining the street specifically to watch you dragged past. The evidence of your own dishonesty tied around your neck for everyone to see. Faced with genuinely severe punishment for even a small, honest miscalculation, bakers developed a simple, practical defense, giving away more bread than the law technically required. Selling 12 loaves, a baker might add a 13th for free. Historians call it the vantage loaf, meant specifically to guarantee the whole batch weighed comfortably over the legal minimum, rather than dangerously close to it. Better to give away one loaf's worth of profit voluntarily than risk the pillory over a miscalculated ounce. This math worked out in a baker's favor too, oddly enough. One free loaf spread across 12 paying customers cost far less than a single conviction. A conviction could mean a fine large enough to wipe out weeks of honest profit, on top of the public humiliation that came with it. Insurance, essentially, paid out quietly in bread instead of hard coin, cheap and easy to give away every single day. If you were running that oven, you'd have made exactly the same calculation and given away the 13th loaf without a second thought. Its origins in raw fear gradually faded, but the custom itself outlasted them, drifting into general use well beyond bread specifically. Modern shops and market stalls across dozens of unrelated trades still occasionally offer a baker's dozen as a small customer courtesy. Most of them are almost certainly unaware they're echoing a centuries-old survival strategy against a punishment involving a hurdle and a rope through the middle of town. No baker wanted to find that out the hard way, in front of the entire town, with a hurdle and a rope waiting. 13 for the price of 12 became such a common, reliable safety margin that the phrase baker's dozen eventually entered everyday English. Its true origin in raw fear is largely forgotten now by the countless people still casually using the phrase today. Step back, and the entire system makes a different kind of sense once you remember what bread actually represented in the medieval household. None of the pieces make sense in isolation. Not the sliding weight tables alone. Not the roving inspectors pulling loaves off the shelf. Not the hurdle waiting patiently in the town square for the next offender. Put them all together, though, and a coherent picture emerges. A society had decided, collectively and deliberately, that its most essential food could not be left to trust alone. Trust was a luxury a town's poorest residents genuinely could not afford, no matter how honest any individual baker actually turned out to be. This wasn't a market regulating some luxury good, the kind wealthy customers could simply do without if the price ever seemed unfair. Wages, rents, and everyday market prices across medieval Europe were often quoted in relation to the price of a standard loaf, a working shorthand for the cost of living itself. A labourer's daily wage was sometimes measured directly against how many loaves it could actually buy that week. A rough but genuinely useful proxy for real purchasing power in an economy that had no modern price index available to track it any more precisely than that. It was the baseline food supply for an entire town's poorest residents. The difference between a full stomach and genuine hunger measured out one loaf at a time, day after day, for households with no real savings and no cushion against a bad run of luck. An underweight loaf wasn't a mistake. It was theft, 1 ounce at a time, taken directly from people who had no real alternative source of food and no cushion to absorb even a small shortfall. Medieval law, for all its harshness, understood exactly what was actually at stake every single time a baker's thumb pressed just slightly too hard on the scale. That understanding, more than any single fine or public shaming, is the real reason the punishment fit a crime that looks, on the surface, almost too small to matter at all.